Hello, I'm Tracy Nicholas, and welcome to Folkloring. I am a passionate folklore practitioner, and to me, folkloring is more than just a podcast. It's my commitment to help you connect with your roots and awaken the wisdom within you. Hello. Before I start this episode, I wanted to jump on quick and share some exciting news with you. My book, Mind Over Magic, is now available for purchase. In it, I talk about our ideas about magic, and I get into some of the science behind what we thought was magic just a couple of decades ago. You can buy the book at folkloringlife.com, and if you would like a personalized dedication, just send me a message and I will make sure that happens. You can also get it in bookstores or on Amazon. If you do get it, it would really help me out if you could leave a review on Amazon. It helps me with visibility, which really helps with sales, and I would truly appreciate it. I would also love to hear any thoughts that you have on the book. If you'd like to continue the conversation about folklore and magic, find me at my school community, Folkloring Life. You can find links for the book, for my community, and a bunch of other stuff on my website, folkloringlife.com. Now, on to the episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Folkloring. And I'm here today with Randee Dawn, who is the author of The Only Song Worth Singing and Leave No Trace. And she also has an upcoming book that we're going to talk about in a minute. But welcome, Randee. Thank you for taking the time to be here today.
No, you are welcome, and thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk about your books that are currently out. We're going to talk about your upcoming book, and probably a lot more than that, and about the folklore underlying the fiction that you create. But before we do that, have you been folkloring lately? And if so, how?
Oh, who hasn't been folkloring? It's the thing to do. Um, the folklore, I think, sometimes runs alongside or parallel or intersects with some superstitions. And I grew up not in a hugely superstitious family, but in a way that kind of stuck with me. And if I'm walking down the street and well, there's the classic "don't step on a crack" kind of thing, right? But if I'm walking down the street and I see a little swirl of leaves, I mean, this time of year we've got leaves on the ground, and you see almost like a little vortex of leaves that sometimes. A long time ago, I was told that that means that's the fairies dancing,
Okay.
and you should say "bless you," because when you bless the fairies, they're supposed to be creatures that cannot go to heaven. So if you bless them, they can now go to heaven. So if you see
Oh,
them dancing and you bless them, they can go to heaven. So that's this is the time of year for that sort of thing. So when I see that, like maybe not verbally all the time, because there's that woman
yeah.
talking to her and blessing the leaves, but I will sometimes do that in my head because I'm like, who's that gonna hurt? So that is I think the most recent folkloring I've been doing.
Okay. Um, that's funny. I wonder if it counts that I've been doing, yard cleanup and it's right at the very end. All the leaves have already dropped. I wonder if it counts if I'm using my leaf blower, if they're dancing. I don't know.
If you make a little vortex, I don't see why not. That's
Mhm.
just speed dancing for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say my folkloring, I've decided to leave all of the leaves down to like on the edges of the yard. I've blown them all to the edges of the yard to leave them for the little bugs and insects and stuff that are gonna bury themselves under that. At least
Mhm.
that's what I'm telling my neighbors that I didn't pick up my leaves.
Well,
So,
it is actually a very good thing. They are good for composting, and if they
yeah,
self-compost on your yard, it makes your yard better. So good for
yeah.
you.
Yeah. So that's one thing that I, well, didn't do. That is folkloring.
Passive folkloring.
Yeah, exactly. But then I also am building a new altar. I have my main altar, I have my kitchen altar, I have a garden altar when it's warm out. It's put away now. I have a business altar, but now, oh, and I just made a ancestor altar. But I'm also building a goddess altar, so I have many altars at this point. But it's nice. I get to see them. Even I put out offerings, and I get to enjoy it, and it's something that I don't have to spend a lot of time on. I just like look up at
Mm.
my altar and there it is, and I think about my spiritual practice. So it is quick and dirty folkloring, I guess. Dirty in the way that I'm really bad at dusting.
Oh, I see. Right. Yes.
So
Well, who says the dust isn't supposed to be part of the altar anyway?
it's true. It's very true. Okay, so let's get into talking about you and your books. Can you just tell listeners a little bit about yourself and kind of the path you took to get to where you are today with your many, many books? And I believe three came out in 2025. That's
Yeah.
astonishing.
Well, it was
Astonishing.
supposed to be three in 2025. One of them got pushed till March, so that's the one that's still coming out. But basically, I've been an entertainment journalist for a lot of years. I've been a novelist longer, but not a published novelist until more recently. But the entertainment journalism is sort of what supported me for many, many years. I wrote for outlets like Variety or the LA Times, and I'm still doing that, but that's kind of winding down a little bit as I do more fiction. My first novel came out in 2024, once I finally really committed myself to the whole process of what it takes to get a novel out, which is a lot of time, a lot of rewrites, and a lot of willingness to take advice and criticism, right? Like, if you're not ready to do that, which I was not for many years, you're not going to get that book out, right? You have to be willing to take the criticism and the editing. So anyway, that book was called Tune In Tomorrow, and it was a funny pop culture fantasy about a reality TV show run by mythical creatures for mythical creatures, but starring humans. And the one that's coming out in March will sort of be the next one in that universe. It's not a sequel, but it's kind of in that universe. The two that actually came out in 2025, one was called The Only Song Worth Singing, and you and I spoke a little bit about that, I believe, in a previous podcast. Um, but that's rock stars and Irish fae, and again, a contemporary setting. The new one that came out in August is called Leave No Trace. And it is, I never quite got the one liner to it, but basically the background is that there is a war going on between humans and fae because the fae worlds have been disappearing. Magic has been leaking into the worlds. And so the fae have nowhere to go but into the human lands. And humans traditionally are not good with that sort of thing. So they're basically saying, stay home, don't come here. Where could that sound? Why does that sound familiar? Anyway, but the foreground story is really that there's a father who wanted to raise his daughter off the grid and away from all this magic because he feels like it's a virus. This magic is scary stuff. So he has raised her in the woods like since she was about 8 years old. So she's not feral, but it's very much off the grid. They only really know each other. He gets hired for hunting parties. And but the thing is, she hasn't really kept away from the magic because she's met the Gilly Doo, the Green Man of the forest out of Scottish folklore, and Ardeo, the bear goddess out of Irish folklore.
Mhm.
And they are kind of one is sort of a friend and one is more of a protector, but they all protect the forest. And her father doesn't know about this because he would not be happy if this happened, and she's afraid of him. So into all of this comes two musicians and their manager. They are escaping a scandal in the real world outside the forest. And the manager is he's a former military guy who fought in the wars between humans and Fae. So if anybody hates Fae more than her father, it's this guy. So needless to say, they have seen the movie Deliverance. They did not get the right message, and they have come and they want to go hunting. They want to hunt a bear, and this is not a good idea. So
Yeah, yeah.
let's just say things go pretty wrong. And that's a bit long-winded, but I'm working on shaving it down when I can.
No, that's really interesting. So I also find it interesting that you picked a couple of musicians and their manager.
Yeah.
And I know that you worked in, entertainment reporting, so that's characters that would be familiar to you, but not the kind of characters that I would imagine would be like, "Hey, let's go out to the forest and hunt bear." You know, it's like you think of them in a different world.
Well, it's kind of a testosterone thing. Like the musicians, one's a guy and one's a girl, and they've been friends and foster siblings, for many, many years. And he's been caught in this scandal, and he can't go out in the regular world without being spotted. So he wants to get away from it all.
Hmm.
And when he sees this movie, he's been smoking a little bit, let's say, and he sees this movie and he gets this brilliant idea that like, oh, I want to be Burt Reynolds. I want to be like the manliest man that ever manned. And so he gets this idea that that's how that's going to happen. And the thing is, he's so coddled and spoiled and has all this money. I mean, think of like if Justin Bieber was doing this, right? So he has like all this money and he can glamp, he does not have to rough it.
Yeah.
He decides we're going to go glamp and he brings the band and he brings his sister, his foster sister who writes all the songs. And so they barely have to rough it, or so it would seem. So he's not really putting himself out there too hard to do this thing. He thinks it's going to restore his belief in himself by doing this. And yeah, and once again, that does not go as he hoped.
Well, when you have a bear goddess out in the woods and you don't know it, it's never gonna go well, is it?
No, I mean, it can go well if you treat her right.
Well, yes, yes.
But one of the taglines I'm using for the book is "What if the bear chooses you?" Right? Like there's that meme that's been going around,
Right, right.
and if RDO is going to choose you, that actually might be a good thing. So don't try
Sure,
and shoot her.
sure. But, only if you're respectful again. Um,
Right.
and it's interesting that the daughter is out there connecting with these, deities or creatures. And
Hmm.
because a lot of, I think, what current belief is around deities is you don't just go tromping up to them and ask them for something, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
You build a relationship. You wouldn't just walk up to a person and be like, "Hi, I'm Tracy, and I need you to do this for me now."
Right. Exactly. That's not how this works.
Yeah. And so I think that it's really interesting that she's sort of connecting and has a relationship with this bear goddess. And I think that that's part of lore that people who are practitioners really, talk about. And that's sort of pagan beliefs are in a lot of cases. But not something necessarily that a person who's not like practicing any kind of spirituality that goes down a pagan road would be aware of. So I think that's a really cool kind of twist on that particular character choice of the, making it a deity.
Yeah, so this is actually a book that I've had in some version or the other for literally decades. I wrote a draft of this book when I was like in middle school. Okay. And now it was quite different. It wasn't exactly a fantasy thing, but there was always a young woman in the forest. There was always these musicians who came to the forest and either got lost or got in trouble, and she had to help them. And there was always a bear. And when I started writing fantasy, I rethought the book and I thought, how is this more of a fantasy book? How is this more something that can have a bigger picture than just people lost in the woods and somebody who walks them out kind of thing?
Right.
And I started doing research, and I had not known about Ardeo the bear goddess. There's a joke in the book where somebody says it sounds like an old Jewish man, Ardeo does not sound like the name for a bear goddess. Um,
I was gonna
and
say an old Italian man, but
yeah, I'm Jewish, so that's kind of where it goes. That's where my mind goes first. But yeah, I can imagine him doing the bear doing like old shtick on in vaudeville or something like that. Oh, Shlomo! So I was fascinated by that, and I really didn't know too much about the bear goddess, and I did some research and based on some of her properties, and I don't want to give out too much information because it would affect the book, like the characters don't necessarily worship her because they don't know that she's a goddess per se. But the things that she does, the young woman also comes with her brother, and her brother disappears at some point, and there is a connection to Ardeo because of that. So Ardeo kind of gets grafted into this whole adventure that's going on in an unintentional way that I don't want to explain too much further. But and Ardeo is meant to be a guardian of the forest, just like the Gilly Dhu is the green man of the forest out of the Scottish folklore. That's a more direct friendship that she has with the Gilly Dhu. He's known for taking care of young people as well as the forest, as well as the animals. And there's a part when she was younger, she was in a dire situation, and he took her into like his little cup, his little group of birch trees, and saved her life. And so they've been friends since. So it's kind of two. It's not like this. It's not a Scooby-Doo trio running around the forest or anything. They know of each other and they interact, but it's very much they're doing their own things, but then they sometimes come together to do other things. And when you mentioned about the worship part of things, I thought that was interesting because there are lots of ways to worship, is the way I look at it. And our young female character, whose name is Lexi, she worships in a way that doesn't involve sitting down and meditating or praying or setting up an altar necessarily. She worships by respecting the forest as it is. Um, the Gilly Do talks to her at one point and says, there should be no death without need. Like, don't kill something just to kill it. If you need it because you need to survive or you need to eat, then that's a valid reason for doing it. So I think that's necessary. It can't just be we have to preserve everything forever and ever and ever. There's a natural order of things. So I think she, and to some extent her father, but in a lesser way, are worshiping and honoring the forest by being part of it, by being integrated into it, as opposed to just, showing up out of nowhere and now I want to kill something, right?
Right.
So I think that's you could look at her character as being worshipful, but in a non, say, religious way.
Hmm. So not as far as being an animist, but just being respectful and making sure that they don't take more than they need and that
Yes.
kind of thing. Okay. Oh,
Yeah, that's how I see it anyway.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Although I will say that knowing that there are actual supernatural creatures in this universe and she knows a couple of them, it does lead it down a path of like if you know a bear deity, maybe that is a little bit more of a spiritual practice. And if one of your best buds is like the guardian of the forest and it's a
Uh-huh.
supernatural creature, like that, it gets a little bit more into the spiritual side from my perspective.
Agreed. Yes. And I think you can look at it in a couple of different ways. But she hasn't tried to attract them. It's just she's kind of come across them in her daily life and interacts with them just as she would anybody else. She showed up in the forest when she was 8 years old. So in terms of what she knows about not just the outside world, but about the spirituality of the forest in the first place, or these creatures, it's all of a pattern for her. This is the stuff that she has learned over the years. It's just as natural to her as anything else.
Right. And of course, she has to tone it down in front of the father because he'd be
Oh yeah.
unhappy about it. So, and isn't that kind of the way with people who do sort of lean into the more magical side of things? If they're, a child of someone who is not that way or their partner is not that way, you sort of dim your light a little bit. And that's always a little sad to me.
I agree. I mean, you don't have to believe in these things, but respecting somebody else's choice to believe in them, as long as it's not hurting anybody, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that that's actually something everybody should think about. And that applies to all forms of worship, whether or not you've got an organized religion or you're doing something that is more faithful to your heart or faithful to your life. If you're not hurting anybody, then let people do what they need to do.
Right. Yeah, I always think about religion as every religion is a religion of one, because whether it's an organized religion or not, you're interpreting it. You may get the same lessons, you may read the same, religious text, but you're interpreting it through your beliefs, your lived experience, what you were taught. And so we all come to our spirituality in a different way, even those who say, I don't believe in any of that, right?
Right.
Because that is, another way of saying, here's my take on spirituality. But yeah, so why those two characters? I mean, maybe not why those two. The bear character is obvious. You said that it's been a long standing, but why sort of the green man figure as like one of the main character or one of the her closest connections?
Right. So this, like I mentioned, this story has been around for a very long time, and I developed as an author along the way, and I never thought the story went out on publicate for potential publication. We sent it to publishers, see if they wanted it. It didn't quite sell. This is a couple of years ago. And I thought, maybe this book is never going to get published. But I really love this character of Lexi. I really love this story. What if there are short stories that I could tell in this? What if there's ways to break out parts? So the manager character who has fought in the war, for example, I ended up getting a short story published about one of his experiences in the war with the Fae, right?
Oh, cool.
So that is a short story that exists in an anthology called Can't Find My Way Home. I'm sorry, my story is called Can't Find My Way Home. My apologies. But you can find more information about that on my website. And then having done that, I thought, well, what if there's a story with Lexi involved? Like, I had this idea of telling a story of her coming to the forest and having a life in the forest and then maybe leaving the forest finally. Like this was kind of this circular thing I wanted to do. She finally finds the courage to leave for good, but then it got transmuted into her coming back after having been gone for a lot of years and finding a place to sort of settle and then become part of, like she will die in the forest and then become part of the forest by doing that. So I really liked that. And it was becoming more and more fantastical slash spiritual as I was rethinking this short story. And I did a little research. I'd heard of the Green Man of the Forest before. He's fairly well known if you know Celtic mythology,
Yeah.
usually seen as a very like a leaf-filled face. You see like this full leaf-filled face. And so I started doing some research and I liked the thing that stuck with me was that he looks for after children and young people to make sure that they're okay in the forest. And that stuck with me because she had been a child in the forest. So it was like these pieces just started coming together. And I had this idea that she goes out hunting. She's trying to impress her dad by killing a deer. And a blizzard strikes because all of this takes place in the Rocky Mountains. So the novel and this story, it all takes place in the Rockies. So a blizzard whips up and she can't get home in time to get out of it. And she calls him Gil. Gil sort of says, look, you have to put down your bow and arrow. You can't come in here with that. But if you come over here, I've got this warm, magical sort of enclosure. And he keeps her out of the storm and he gives her like a little leaf cup of primrose tea and, all these things and he said, she's like, well, where are you from? And he said, well, I live over here. And if you go like behind the trees, it's like the magical world where he lives. And she's like, can I come? And he said, no, but maybe someday. So the idea is like this friendship develops between them. She survives, of course. He lets her out after the blizzard is over. Dad has questions, but Dad does not get answers because she can't tell him about the magic. And that's sort of like the origin story of the two of them. And then the rest of the short story is more about how she interacts with him over the years and decides to leave the forest and then come back. And he sort of when she comes back for that final time, he takes her into his world, right? So it kind of just grew organically from this is what I think the story needs. This is something the story that has been talked about in folklore that would work. How do I make these characters work together? So that origin story is slightly a version of it is now in the book. Not quite as long. So yeah, that's just kind of how it went. And then the bear, I'd always had this mythic sized bear because I had a character who sort of needed to protect or needed to reassert himself in some way. And the older I got, I was like, that's not fair. We shouldn't have to kill a bear to do that. So I didn't want that to be the climactic moment in my book is where this guy kills this poor bear. I mean, the bear is, but at the same time, the bear is just doing what a bear does, right? So I thought, well, what if we could recast the bear in some other fashion? They would still be sort of mythical sized, but there would be more to it. There'd be a deeper connection, a deeper relationship, and something that maybe the audience might not see coming. So that's really kind of how those two folded themselves into this story. It's been just rewritten so many times because as I grew up, I had different ideas for the story. I mean, if you start with a story in middle school and you don't publish it until you're like 50, I mean, that's a lot. I grew up, they grew up, my concept of what a story did grow up. So that's really how that happened. I know that wouldn't happen with a lot of stories. I don't think most stories take this long to get out there. But yeah, that's kind of how they became part of the story.
So you said it's set in the Rockies,
Mm.
and so why get these sort of Celtic folkloric creatures? Why that choice instead of Native American or, some other kinds of folklore creatures?
Right. So there's at least there's two different ideas behind this. The primary one is that in the back of my mind, I have this idea that all mythical creatures kind of live in the same soup in some ways. That it depends on what part of the world you're in that you're more likely to encounter them, but that doesn't say that you can't have one pop up over here or over here. There's nothing that says you can't have a Norse god show up in Arizona, right? So they kind of live on the other side of the veil, is what I call it. And they can occasionally come over. And if the veil is shrinking and all of these mythical creatures are losing their world, they might pop out anywhere. So for me, the idea with the Gilly Doo is he doesn't stick necessarily to just a forest in Scotland. He could be in any forest. And I just sort of look at it in that broad sense. It allows me to incorporate a lot of different folklore that you might not have heard of before. I think we've heard a lot of folklore about a lot of certain creatures, and I'd like to expand that. To that end, I I have a lot of respect for Native American culture. It is not my culture, and I am not an expert in it. So I would not want to, I don't think that it necessarily has to be cultural appropriation to do that. If you do it with respect and you do it with, read the right readers to make sure you're doing it right. But that was not the milieu that really was firing my imagination because I'm not super familiar with it and it's not my heritage. So in one way, it's not my place to write it. I would love it if somebody else wanted to do that. But for me, what I picked were the things that I was familiar with and also have some connection to in ancestry.
And I hear that. And I think that the other thing about, Native American lore is that there were so many tribes.
Mhm.
And so it's so widely varied. And it's hard to do it respectfully, I think, if you're not able to put it within the cultural context. I did just finish a book called Chasing North American Monsters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a great book, and it talks about a lot of cryptids, a lot of different, very local. It goes state by state in the US and then, in
Mhm.
different provinces in Canada. It's a little bit more of like an encyclopedia kind of format, but
Like a
it's,
bestiary, maybe?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But it was a lot of fun. Like I, of course, immediately went to Illinois, where I am, and there was a creature I'd never heard of, and there was like a lake monster, and so I was like, well, that's fascinating. So yeah, I mean, there's newer lore as well that I think would not be problematic in that way, but I
Yeah,
can appreciate that the like these creatures can pop up anywhere, like people move all over the globe, right? And so
right,
why wouldn't they? And I think that we see when people are in, diaspora, they bring their folklore with them and then it alters based on where they are
right.
and their circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to get into the specifics about the fact that the Rocky Mountains would be much snowier, for example, or harsher climate than Scotland or Ireland might be, and now these creatures are living in that environment, well, you can look at how they may have adapted and also that they're magic, so maybe adaptation isn't all that hard. But yeah, the other thing about this too is that part of the inspiration for this book actually came from a New Zealand film called Smash Palace, which is really just about the disintegration of a marriage. But at one point, the father kidnaps his daughter and takes her into the New Zealand bush, which, unlike the Australian bush, is very tropical and very green and very lush. And his idea is, we're just going to stay here so I don't have to lose you in custody. It doesn't last very long, and he goes home, and that's the only inspiration from the movie. But I started thinking when I saw it, what if they didn't leave? So I didn't know enough about New Zealand. And when I was writing this, we didn't even have internet. That's how long this has been. So I started doing research with more local, with more local flora and fauna. And the Rockies kind of just stood out to me as the big kahuna here. And I've been there since, and I have traveled there and camped there and all that. So,
Oh.
yeah, it's kind of this weird, how did we get here sort of thing, but that's how that worked out.
Yeah, I've been camping in the Rockies once and I got terrible altitude sickness.
Oh, oh
Yeah,
yeah,
it
that's
was
harsh.
bad. I had only ever been to Denver, and then we
Okay.
went much higher to go camping. And I didn't
Yeah.
even realize how sick I was until I came down the mountain to get a phone signal because it
Uh-huh.
was Father's Day and I wanted to call my father.
Right.
And I was like, "Oh my God, do I feel good?" And then I had to go back for the next 2 days for
Right,
camping
right.
and feel terrible again. I'm a flatlander. I'm at what, 50 feet above sea level, maybe?
Yeah. I grew up in Maryland, it once again, I mean, and not to belabor the point or anything, because this was such a long-lived book, it's hard to sort of see where I leave off, my interests lay off, cut off, and the book begins because I started doing research for the book when I was quite young. How does one live in the forest? What do you need to know? Like, how do you survive? I was really got into the whole survival aspect of it. And I don't know if that, and that's been a lifelong thing. So like even though I grew up in Maryland and didn't camp all that much until I was much older, this was just kind of something I developed an interest in because I was writing about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to say because as you say, as you grow and develop, your tastes change, your interests change, your skill level changes.
Hmm.
And so it was amazing to me to hear you talk about like going back and incorporating this new character because I write nonfiction. So it's just like the whole like, writing a novel to me is sort of this like dim mystery that I can almost peer into, but not quite. So
Hmm.
I have a lot of respect for the ability to go back and rework a story and, take in feedback and take in edits and which a lot of writers I think struggle with. I was very grateful for the opportunity to have a really good editor,
Hmm.
but my again, my book is nonfiction. It's not my characters that I have brought to life. So
Right.
it's to be able to, keep changing it until it gets to a point where it's like, yeah, this is ready now. That's really amazing. So I applaud you for that.
Thanks. I'm sure that there is, I mean, having done a lot of journalism, which of course is nonfiction also, there is a sense when whatever kind of writing you're doing, when something really just clicks.
Yeah.
Like, that's a good line. I've developed this story correctly. I've put in the right things. Like, you know that as a writer if you do it enough. And so I'm sure you felt quite a lot of what I'm feeling as a fiction writer. I just have a lot more freedom in a lot of ways because I don't have to adhere to facts all that much.
Right, right. Okay, well, I don't want to press you on this book any further because I don't want to have any spoilers come out, but let's talk about your upcoming book.
Sure. So as I mentioned, my first book was called Tune In Tomorrow, and it was about the reality show. I have since developed this idea that the Fay entertainment system, which is the Seelie Court Network. This is, by the way, this is funny. Those books were not the books we were just talking about, not funny. So if you're thinking that there's a joke, for those books, they're not. But Tune In Tomorrow is meant to be silly. So I had this idea that the Seelie Court Network which creates all the Fey entertainment, has developed this system called trope towns. So imagine if there was one town that was populated by humans where all the Hallmark movies were made. Like, it has like 80 bakeries for 300 people, or there's constantly meet cutes everywhere, right? Or there's a bus that brings in, tired working women from out of town and they fall in love with the local lumberjack, right? So like imagine that was a town. And then what the Sealy do is they film movies based on the lives of the people in the town. So what has happened is that all these trope towns, based on various tropes that we know from television and movies, have been built beyond the veil. And the town that we are focusing on in this book, which is called We Interrupt This Program, is sort of imagine the Murder She Wrote town, right? Where like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
this small seaside village and people keep getting killed. So, this is a terrible murder rate this place has. So we had the gray-haired, tough old lady who solves the crimes, and the Sealy make movie out of this. But the problem is there's a new mystery in town, which is this is no longer working. the mayor, who is a Seelie, who is a magical creature who runs the whole thing. He's the only magical creature in town. He went into his house one day and has not come back out. We haven't seen him for years. People are disappearing in the town. We don't know why. Stuff isn't working. And the lady who is the woman who has been solving all these mysteries over the years now has to solve a real mystery, which is how to get him come out of his house and start working again before the whole town falls apart. And there's a bunch of other things going on. We have I've been mentioning Seelie, who are sort of the Celtic creators in a lot of ways. But we also have the unseelie, which are more of the darker side of things. So the flip side, I don't necessarily want to say one is bad and one is good, but one likes to create, the other one is very much into decreating, shall we say. And we have an unseelie who decides he wants to show up at this village and do some reconnaissance and find out why things are going wrong so he can tear it down. He wants to make his bones by tearing the plates down. So we've got that character showing up. So there's a bunch of characters who all come together to kind of solve this mystery and figure out what has gone wrong and how to fix it and can it be fixed. So that's called We Interrupt This Program, because all the programming has been interrupted. And that one is coming out on March 3rd of 2026. And again, we'll be silly and punny and backstagey, and also a lot about the nature of storytelling and what a great story can do versus just say a good story. And this is some of the first times I'm really talking about it on camera and for publicity. So it's exciting to me. I just met with my editor, and there's a third book that's going to be coming out in the series, all separate, all standalones. But I'm working on that third one right now. So
Okay.
This is where my head is at the moment.
It's reminds me of a podcast that I used to listen to, and I want to say it was called The Church of the Crystal Cove.
Oh, okay.
And it was a podcast of Reverend Peter Laws, who has the Into the Fog podcast, which is wildly popular. And this was sort of just like a pet project of his. And it is a town that has all like the villains from horror films. Right? And they all live there. And it's like given from the point of view of the pastor who runs the church of this town where all these villains
They have a
live.
church.
Yeah, they have a church. I keep bothering him to do an episode that is a confessional, but he hasn't gotten to that yet. So, but it would fit into your universe.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. The new book I'm working on right now does have a town that's not quite the same, but the way I call it, it has an official name, but I call the town Second Chance, which is basically think about like the Dexter TV show. Like he did all these horrible things, but he got away with it and went to a small town and tried to rebuild his life. What if the whole town was made up of those people? People who had somehow pissed off the Seelie, got conscripted into this town, and now we're making movies based on their horrible crimes against Seelie. So yeah, so there's a town like that that's in the book that's going to be coming out after We Interrupt This Program.
Yeah, that I like the idea of that, it's this very specific, exaggerated kind of thing in the town, and everyone just wanders around like it's completely normal.
Right, they're just living their lives, like this is just how and every so often they get a call saying, all right, we're going to film your story, get over here. Or sometimes they just film them in their daily lives and turn that into a movie. So it's the Seelie who runs the town. They're a director, they're a mayor, and they're a showrunner. So they're the SMDs of the whole town, these Seelie. And they get to decide what stories are going to be told to be shown to the other magical creatures who watch these series.
So are they aware of the other towns, or are they just sort of in their own little, is it like what was that movie
Oh,
with
the Truman Show?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they are actually. So it's funny because I came up with this proposition, and then when you start examining it closer, like you have to come up with more rules. Like, what do they know? When do they know it? What about kids? That's been the real stickler, I got to tell you. So yes, these people, except for the town we were just talking about, Second Chance, all the trope towns, people are volunteer, people are hired. It's like, oh, we'd like you to live in this town. What do you think about this? Like people, it's a voluntary thing primarily. If you are, sort of conscripted, you go because you've done wrong, then yes, you don't have the choice. And you go to Second Chance. So yes, they are aware. I didn't want to have to, in a funny book, I didn't want to have to deal with the moral implications of them being completely unaware, because that was just more of a darker discussion than I think we needed to do. But then I started thinking, well, what about kids? What if like you're a parent and you have a 5-year-old? Do they know that this exists? And I've sort of done a little dance around that, and there's discussion about it quite a bit in the next book. We enter up this program because we do have two young characters. And the idea is that the young people in these towns really don't know that they're in a trope town if they're under 18. And then once they graduate high school, they turn 18, then they are given the secret to the whole thing, and they can decide to stay or they can decide to leave, but now they know. But until that time, there's too much that can go wrong. There's too much that can be confusing. And there's a line in We Interrupt This Program that the Seelie don't really want kids in their stories anyway because they're so unpredictable. So they prefer the kids to be only showing up every once in a while, like in the background. So their theory is that kids should be in scenes, but not herds. So, so not a herd of children.
Yeah, who's the actor who famously said that he would never act with children, or you should never act with children or
Oh,
animals? That,
W.C. Fields,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that was his
I
whole
think
thing.
you're
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
So yeah, that just gives me a line in the sand I can draw, and each town kind of does it a little bit different. And in Second Chance, you can't even have kids; like there's just literally no kids. That's a bone of contention for the next book. But yeah, dealing with the kid issue was sort of like, gosh, is it fair to have a town that you want to do funny things in, where you're essentially, screwing up this kid's childhood? Like, let's give them a normal childhood so they can leave if they want to. So that's
I
why.
mean, usually when I'm at least watching and also probably reading about, supernatural stuff, I tend to like the darker stuff.
Mm.
But every once in a while I get sick of that and I'm like, I need something that is a little bit lighter. And so a guilty pleasure of mine is some of those short series or films that have like younger characters and something spooky happens
Hmm.
because they sort of
Yeah.
take it in stride, even when you get to something darker like Stranger
Hmm.
Things, right? They just are like those
Yeah.
younger characters, and they're not, young. There was the one girl, the sister, that was quite young, but she was a pretty tough
Yeah.
character. But I feel like when you sort of say, okay, we're just going to accept that supernatural things exist, that a lot of times kids are just like rolling with the punches way better than the adults, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. It's really just depends on how active you, like I didn't know when I came up with this idea how important the kids would be in We Interrupt This Program, but they did. And so I wanted to make sure that I had an idea. There's also some funny moments that you can come up with when they don't know. Like, for example, they learn quickly that like if they start to discuss things that have to do with magic in some fashion, that it the lot they can't speak the words. They start talking about sports. And that's something that happened in Tune In Tomorrow when we had an all adult characters, but if they left the show and went into the real world, like because you don't have to stay there, like you can just go back and forth for your like a regular job. But if our main character went back home and wanted to tell her roommates what her job was like, it would just sound like she was reading sports scores because there's like this prohibition from being able to say what's going on. So that kind of applies to the kids in town. So you have a couple of funny moments where they're like, wait a minute, I meant to say magic, but I said football. And so they by the time they're old enough, they've got some suspicion that something's going on here, but they just don't know what. So it turned out that there was some amusement value in their
Yeah, I love that it's
ignorance.
football too, because, it's like so the opposite of anything magical, It's like the kinder, gentler version of like warlike, that kind of competition.
Right.
And the people that are really into it are so passionate about it. And just so to have someone who's
Mm,
not into it at all just suddenly start like spewing about sports, that's hilarious. I
yeah.
love that.
Thank you.
So are these completely modern towns aside from the fact that they have all this weird stuff going on, or is it sort of in a different kind of universe that has different technology?
So they're generally the towns that the towns the trope towns need to be, right? Like we don't necessarily, they're mostly contemporary towns, right? But if, for example, we wanted to do the story of the up like an upstairs downstairs kind of story, or a the Downton Abbey type trope town kind of thing of the then yeah, we would put them into a period situation. But for the most part, these towns, they operate a little bit in the past, sort of. They're not there's no cell phones, for example. There is reference to like the World Wide Web, but it's a Fey-based thing. It's the Arachne World Wide Web, right? So they're the only ones who are using it. Um, and they do have television in these towns, but they can only watch, things that are permitted for them to see. The stuff that's being filmed. They're not watching the TV shows that we're watching, for example. They're watching stuff that is created by SCN. So the TV is not a big deal. So the idea is more like, also, if you notice, like, we don't watch people on TV watching a lot of TV, right? Because that's boring. That's not the kind of thing you want. So if you're going to create a town where you want to have interesting things happen, you don't want to have people sitting around being passive. So the technology of a town is not really that involved in the town. Yes, they have lighting, for example, or they have modern things. There's references to cars, but these are very small towns, so cars are not a huge thing. They do a lot of walking around. And the fact is that when you create a whole world that is separate from other worlds that we are familiar with, or we can immediately go to and say, oh, I know how that would work. Like, but when you create a whole fresh one, it's good to just not focus too hard, on every single little detail, because, if I were to work a whole economic system or a religious system or whatever, we never get to the actual story. So I love the questions that you're asking, because these are great. And these, of course, are worth talking about. Whether or not they get discussed in the book just really depends on how many pages I'm allowed to have. And you got to get to the story at some point. So there's a certain amount of hand wavy, yeah, that works fine.
Yeah,
And then we just move on to the
yeah. I
actual
read
story.
an interesting article. I think it was about. I think they called it lore dropping, where
Mhm.
the basic point was if you're describing too much of the world, that like
Mm,
it's not interesting writing. Because like
yeah,
you don't want to, like, if you want to go on vacation to Greece, right? You don't want to sit in
mhm,
your house and look at a bunch of pictures of Greece. You want to go experience
right,
it. And so,
yeah,
you don't have to be like, oh, and the internet is, wink wink nod nod arachne. Like, you just have to call it that, right? And
yes.
I mean, thank God it wasn't like Anansi World Wide Web or the Norns World Wide Web.
Well, there is a reference at one point. There's a character who refers to the fact that he's picked up a lot of trickster ideas by watching Anansi and Loki's God Talks. So instead of TED
Right,
Talks, we have
right.
God Talks. They get a
Yeah,
shout out,
yeah.
a little bit of shout out
I
there.
I love a good trickster god, so I think that that's fantastic.
Yes.
So, are the main characters like the Seelie characters, or are they the people,
Mhm.
or both?
Yes.
Okay.
Um, so in We Interrupt this program, the main characters are primarily humans, but we do also have an unseelie character, the Seelie mayor who is stuck in the house, and the unseelie guy gets paired up, does not want to be paired up, but is paired up by the executives with a brownie. Brownies are, super helpful little creatures that only want to be helpful, but these two get paired up. They don't want to be paired. They're like the opposite couple, the odd couple. Um, so they are in there, but there's just as many humans that we're interacting with because the town is populated by humans. So in the future books that I plan to do, sometimes there'll be more emphasis on the magical characters, and sometimes there'll be more emphasis on the human characters. But for me, it's what's interesting is always how these two mesh or clash, because they have different worldviews. We talked about the fact that these are funny books. What's great about running a funny book is if you're lucky and you can hit the right points, you can actually talk about serious things. We enter, Tune In Tomorrow gets into the whole immortality discussion and what does it mean if a human gets immortality? How does that translate for both good and bad? In We Interrupt, you get a discussion about magical creatures who live for forever, who decide to just exercise their powers and they don't care what the humans think. Like, I'm just going to walk all over you. Well, what is that like? So I love having these slightly darker but more thoughtful discussions because um, often they just don't come up organically in a lot of stories, and that's one of the things that I love digging
Right. And
into.
I think that it's so cool to have these characters that are like the Seelie, but like and get into them because so often the stories that we get, the actual, lore that we have, the folklore,
Mhm.
is like the characters are one dimensional and the stories aren't, rich. So when you can get into an actual personality of a character like that, I think that's
Mm.
fascinating.
Yeah, they're like one step removed, It's the same thing we often see if somebody includes a god in a story. There are exceptions, of course, but I think that we want there you have an author who wants to leave them as, like you say, a one-dimensional representation of something as opposed to a more three-dimensional with hopes and dreams and thoughts and a different world perspective. Because let's face it, if you're an immortal or even a semi-immortal, you have a very different perspective on what humans are than humans have of
Right, right.
themselves.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this book. I cannot wait until it comes out. So it sounds like it's going to be
Oh,
so
yay.
much fun.
Thanks. I'm really hoping the people will love it.
Okay, so before we wrap up, how can people find your work?
So if you look at my name on the screen or you look me up, I'm Randee Dawn and randeedawn.com. So Randee is with two E's, Dawn like the sun comes up, dawn.com. I have articles there, I have blog posts, I have all my books and links to get them. So that's really the best way. And on social media, I am usually Randee with two E's or Randee Dawn. So wherever you might go in your main social media feeds, that you can find me there too.
Okay, great. So do you have any final thoughts for listeners before we say goodbye?
Gosh, about anything?
Anything at all. And well,
Uh,
sort of vaguely folklore related would be nice, but anything.
oh, okay. Um, well, let's see. You know, Folklore is one of these things that is just, I think it keeps your mind engaged, whether or not you are worshiping it or just believe it or think of it as superstition. It opens the world to other thoughts and other ways of thinking. And I think that works for your daily life and just interacting with humans too. Have an open mind, be willing to see the world from different perspectives. One of the great things that fantasy does is it presents those perspectives, and we can say we agree with that or not, but keeping the mind open that you might be wrong is always something I think worth
Yeah.
keeping in mind.
Well, great. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I'm very excited about the upcoming book, and I just really
Thanks.
appreciate you spending the time to talk about folklore and folkloring and your books.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. I loved having this conversation.
As always, thanks for listening to Folkloring. If you liked what you heard, please consider leaving a rating and review, and don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. If you have any questions or comments or would like to suggest a topic for a future episode, please email us at folkloringpod@gmail.com or message us on Facebook or Instagram. Other places you can find me are at the Folklore Podcast as the theater, film, and storytellers correspondent, or creating folklore-inspired games at madmenandheroes.com. Stay curious, stay connected, and keep the traditions alive. And I hope that wherever you are, folklore is making your life more magical.